Hi friends, a few days ago on 26th of January we had Invasion Day here in Australia. Invasion Day is Australia Day. It's when the genocide began, full-on genocide of Indigenous people here in Australia, and particularly in Tasmania. The Tasmanian Indigenous people here were almost wiped out completely. And unfortunately our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who's an authoritarian wannabe, he did a little Twitter video, and instead of actually mentioning Indigenous people and what happens on Invasion Day, or Australia Day as he calls it, and he's not interested in changing the date, by the way, as is a few people in Australia, but most people would like to change the date. He talked about Narendra Modi. He congratulated Narendra Modi, the fascist Indian Prime Minister, and talked about India. That's what he did on Invasion Day in Australia. So he is part of a certain denial of the genocidal history of Australia. Until we properly face that history, just like the United States, until we properly face our genocidal history, it's not enough to just apologize for the stolen generations as Kevin Rudd did. There has to be a complete acknowledgement of what's gone before us, why we are here, whose land we are occupying, and all of that as white people. Until we do that, we can't truly begin to change the way we function, what we are still doing to Indigenous people here in Australia, which is not great. It's not great at all. And there's suicides of very, very young Indigenous people, like some as young as 9 years old. And there are still a high disproportionate levels of Indigenous people here in Australia who are incarcerated. So it rings very similar to what goes on in the United States. And why I bring this up is because I wanted to just look at something that Yasha Levine, the leftist journalist who has a Substack, and I'll leave a link to this article because this is important for us to think about. As internationalists, we should care about any sort of oppression, occupation, repression, genocide, what's going on in Yemen, all that kind of thing, the genocide in Yemen. Anything that is a colonialist, patriarchal, capitalist experiment we should care about. And this is why this Yasha Levine article, where he talks about the California-run investor-backed genocide that happened to Indigenous people. And I can't read you the whole thing, the whole article, because it's behind a paywall, and I don't want to do that because, like, I respect Yasha Levine's work, and I feel like we should try and support these leftist journalists, these ones who are really trying hard. They're not joining corporate media or anything like that. They're not part of The Intercept, run by that billionaire backer or anything like that. These are just independent journalists who are trying to make ends meet. But I wanted to read part of it and then encourage you to join his Substack. So Yasha says, turns out that California ran its own investor-backed genocide squads with 7% annual returns guaranteed by the state. This is to genocide Indigenous people in that state. A fine example of California's genocidal settler democracy in action. California was made a state in 1850, 2 years after gold was discovered on John Sutter's property, east of today's Sacramento. The area had one of the densest Indian populations in California. After this find, many of the Indians... Now, I'm not sure... I guess I'm not sure about the word Indians that he uses here, but I guess he probably knows better than I. He lives in the United States. But anyway, after this find, many of the Indians were enslaved, either killed, enslaved, or driven off their land and forced into the mountains, cutting them off from their normal sources of food. It was a policy of slow starvation, and it happened up and down the state. And if any Indians defended themselves or killed any quote-unquote livestock or horses in order to eat, settlers saw this as an attack, part of the savages' war against Western civilization, and would call in state-funded militias and U.S. Army troops to go and massacre any Indians they found in the area. Charming. In its first years of operation, California's legislature authorized the creation of what were essentially genocide squads empowered to hunt and kill any Indians they found. California's politicians expected that the federal government would eventually foot the bill for these, quote, expeditions, end quote. So basically, state-funded or government-funded genocide squads. But they didn't want to waste time waiting around for that to happen. They wanted to send out the troops now. So the legislature passed a bunch of bond measures that offered wealthy individuals the opportunity to invest in California's, quote, safety, end quote. And the state guaranteed returns which it expected to be eventually paid out with federal cash when finally it came through. As Benjamin explained, on May 3, 1852, less than 15 months after raising $500,000 for ranger militia expeditions against Indians, legislators passed a new $600,000 bond, quote, for the payment of the expenses of Mariposa, Second El Dorado, Utah, Los Angeles, Clear Lake, Klamath, and Trinity and Monterey expeditions against the Indians, quote, end quote. The act specified that the expectation that Washington, D.C. would reimburse California, but that meanwhile the state would pay 7% annual interest to bondholders. Such generous interest encouraged both banks and individuals to buy, quote, war bonds, end quote, thus drawing both institutional investors and others into collusion with legislators to support past and future state Indian hunting operations. The bond issue lured many Californians into financially supporting that killing machine. And he shows an actual image of the people of the state of California represented in state and assembly do enact as follows, and it sort of goes through that. So that's actually sort of evidence of that. So this is sort of, I don't know, when I actually had a look at a book he suggested, which I'm going to put up. I can't recall the name of it right now, and I don't have it in front of me, but I got it on Audible, and I'll put up a link to that book and the name of it. But it's about, I think it's called The American Genocide, and I was listening to some of it, and it's, I don't know if I can actually, I don't know if I could get through it really, but I will try and have, I will try and get a hold of the actual copy of the book or listen to it on Audible and see what it says. But I imagine it's quite grueling. And I just wanted to throw in here too that the Second Amendment, which I've mentioned before, and which the Empire Files has done a show on about why the Second Amendment was formed, why the Second Amendment was created. And the main reason for the Second Amendment was to make sure that militias had guns, and they were to put down uprising slaves, and also to hunt and kill indigenous people and steal their land. So that was one of the main reasons the Second Amendment was created, for the small militias, who then became the KKK and then who became the police. So what happened in California and what has happened over the United States, what happens here in this country in Australia, what happens to Indigenous people in Canada, all the different Western countries, Britain, and what they did to India was just horrific. The colonialist past of Britain is just a major massacring catastrophe of all kinds of people. This, sort of is something that if Western countries do not look at and do not sort of truly accept their past, which is something that the Chris Hedges says the United States and James Baldwin, the writer, who's now the late James Baldwin, he used to talk about how the United States has not accepted their white supremacist genocidal past that continues on today. And that is something that, nothing is ever going to truly change until we do. We can keep shoving it under the carpet and try to pretend with little trimmings around the edges, making a little apology here and an apology there, but the history books really don't present the real story. And we can sort of pretend like we're looking at it, pretend like we're doing something about it. But the very least, the minimum standard of decency is to acknowledge the full breadth and horrendous destruction and carnage and the destruction of a people and a lot of different tribes. Like, for example, in Australia, there were so many indigenous tribes in Australia. To not even acknowledge the length and breadth of the genocidal, the genocides that have gone forth is just appalling, really, and it makes me sick. It makes me sick in the stomach to read stuff like this. I don't know about you, but it makes me feel ill to think that they actually would go up and they drive these indigenous people up into the hill in California, and then they would to try and starve them, and then they would send out posses and militia to go and hunt them down and kill them. And of course, this is what we do to animals every single day, isn't it? Non-human animals. And you know I'm vegan, so it's a moral imperative for me to bring that up as regularly as possible, because a lot of what we do to humans, we already do to non-human animals. And if we think they're not connected, then we are mistaken. So that's why I'm vegan. One of the reasons I'm vegan is because non-human animals are not our resources, they're not our property, they're sentient beings, and we have no rights to use them. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to talk about. I invite you to please check out Yasha Levine and check out his Substack blog, and please support it. I think you just I think it's not one of those things where you can just do it $5 a month. I think you have to pay. You just pay an outright amount for the year, but it's really important and it's really worth it. And I'm trying to encourage Yasha Levine to maybe start a YouTube channel and start talking about things, because he's actually very articulate, as you would imagine, and he's actually a Russian immigrant too, which is very interesting. His parents moved from Russia in 1990, and so he's got very interesting takes. He's actually, the name of his Substack is called Immigrants as a Weapon. That's really all I wanted to talk about, and you probably noticed that I haven't been online lately, and I sort of explained that in yesterday's live stream why. So I hope that explains it. And so I've been a bit low in energy for a few reasons, and not that I haven't wanted to do something, it's just, you know how it is. And also I have a history of depression too, so sometimes I'm a bit susceptible to that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and my name's Trish Roberts. Until next time you're watching, thanks, Signals from Vega. Bye for now.